Okay, good morning, everyone. It's such a delight to see you here. What is going on? Oh my goodness, it sounds like a. Yes, I would imagine so. Well, I'm very glad that we're here. I love this venue. It's a little sort of off the beaten path, and it feels like we're in a garden, and it just, always makes me happy to be here.
In a Mughal tent, right?
Yes, exactly, exactly. And of course, even more delighted to be in conversation with Amit, whose work I've so long admired. And I mean, honestly, I can't think of a better way to spend a Monday morning. I don't know about you, but I really can't. We're here to speak about many things, but mainly this little beautiful book. I always feel when I'm speaking about Amit's work, holding his books in my hand, that I need to reach somehow for a newer language. All these words, beautiful, exquisite, they seem to fall short and seem to fall a little flat. So I'm going to do my best to, to describe or share the experience of reading this book with you in the best way that I can. It's small, it's submersive, it's subversive, it's light and dark and deep. And as with so much of Amit's work, it's wonderfully immersive in this moment. It's a suspension of time. It's time-filled and yet it's timeless. I don't know how you do it, Amit, honestly. The book is set across 4 months. That's what we learn in Berlin, and we'll talk about all of that in more detail in just a moment. So we know this. We know it's 4 months, but it's this thing that Amit does, and does so beautifully and so brilliantly, that collapses into a moment. I don't quite know how else to put it, but I am still immersed in the moment of the novel. I read it a few days ago, but it's still there. It lingers, it stays with you like an unfamiliar song or an unfamiliar fragrance, and it lingers. I'm still there, very much. So thank you for this book, Amit, really. I read somewhere that, and these are complicated, I know, moments of conception, the origins of a book, all that kind of thing. But in this thinking of moments, I'm also wondering if there are moments that the book alludes to or is inspired by. And you have mentioned that it comes perhaps from 2 trips that you made to Berlin in 2 successive years, in 2004, 2005. And, we're somewhat long past those moments, but I'm wondering why, and this always interests me. Why does a writer write a particular book at a particular time? What was it that made you return, if it was a return at all? And what made this book emerge in the here and now?
Well, thank you, Janice, firstly, for again, like you, I'm searching for words, but for that really wonderful introduction, wonderful, such an anodyne word. But anyway, I can't. We are not going to spend too much time looking for new words to describe things which I think are evident, at least as far as your introduction is concerned. And your question about where the book comes from, right? Is that
Why now? I think I'm really interested in, the journey of a writer through their books, and why a particular place at a particular moment? Why a particular book at a particular moment?
Yes. Yeah, it's a mysterious thing. It genuinely is, because sometimes you have ideas for more than one book, which stay with you maybe, but you go to one first, or another one kind of comes to you, it takes over. So I mean, it's the idea for this novel has had been with me for a long time, I suppose. But then ideas for other novels had also been with me for a while, and all these ideas were attractive in the way they stayed with me, and were also tenuous. You know, they were tenuous, they were risky, and I didn't think of them as risky. I didn't think of them as tenuous. But you know, if I told somebody that this is what I want to write a novel about, it would seem tenuous, because I would have absolutely nothing to describe in terms of, you know, the story, the content. So Odysseus Abroad, my sixth novel. Now I had this kind of idea that I would write about somebody like my uncle in London, uh, and cast him as Odysseus or Ulysses. And this was, I'm trying to think, it came out in 2014, so it had been with me for a long time, that idea. And overlapping with that particular idea, which I did finally begin to work on around 2012 or so, or 13, emerged these other ideas, one of which was about going to Bombay and discovering that, you know, a friend, the protagonist, who just by coincidence happens to be called Amit Chaudhuri, had grown up with, and who's now in rehab, recovering from his drug addiction. The absence of this friend has a greater impact than the protagonist imagined it, and it might have had.
This is friend of my youth.
Friend of my youth. And so this came to me, and then this idea of a man arriving in Berlin and becoming more and more immersed. And so all these ideas were there.
Yes.
And I remember finishing Odysseus Abroad and doing something which I rarely do, but I was chatting with my then Indian publisher,
Right.
Chiki Sarkar.
Right.
And you know, I was saying that I'm thinking of writing, and again, both seemed absurdly implausible as ideas for novels. But going to Bombay and writing about this missing friend having an impact on this person, and the other is about a man arriving in Berlin. And she said something very sort of encouraging and nice, and I'm sure both will be whatever. So I thought, now I need to kind of decide. And I went for Friend of My Youth. And then then I turned to this. I thought, let me follow it through. Let me investigate this idea, which to me had become important as an idea, also partly because of my strange unhappiness in the world we live in now.
Yep.
And one way of describing the world we live in now, which people who grew up in the 90s may not be so aware of, is the post-Cold War world. And this is the world we are now in at the moment, and have been since 1990. So my strange sense of unhappiness, a different kind of unhappiness maybe from the way we used to think of it, which, you know, as we were discussing, comes upon us at certain points of time when we are meant to be celebrating, maybe. You know, the celebratory nature of globalization, you know, its cheerleading nature, and our strange but unexpressed sense of unhappiness. And in the midst of that was this man arriving in Berlin and becoming absorbed in something home-like. But he had no kind of connections with it historically in the terms that were given to him. Like, you know, you're South Asian, you're Indian, you're whatever the terms might be, post-colonial. None of those accounted for this sense of recognition. So those things have been on my mind independently and will continue to be on my mind. So this book was one way of um, exploring these thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I love that what emerges is a sense of a continuum, how our books in some ways are never separate from each other, that they exist on this continuum of thought and exploration, and it's about one emerging at one point and another at another point, but they are not severed from each other in any way. And of course, the second thing that you said about how the impulse, the motivation for writing the book being spurred by a sense of disquiet and unhappiness about the state of the world now, and that kind of harking you back, throwing you back into a moment where a similar kind of disquiet perhaps or unhappiness could be, I don't know if the word is pinpointed, but could be recognized. And we'll go back to that for sure, because that's definitely, such a strong theme in the book. I've read and I've listened to your talk, Why I Write Novels, and I go back to it very often.
Oh, have you?
Yes,
I didn't realize that.
Absolutely. And there's so many things, of course, to talk about within that essay, that talk. But what I really, sort of hold very close and what I find very interesting is your idea of outliers. And I was wondering, so outliers being these, what Amit calls these almost inessential, elements around which a plot finds meaning. And I was wondering whether these trips to Berlin had somewhere for you in some old notebook that you tucked away, whether you had some outlier moments there that you then came back to find meaning around in the book that it has now become.
Yeah, thank you. So outliers, I mean, yes. For me, these are very interesting sort of things one stores away, whether by kind of jotting them down in a notebook or in your head. I stopped jotting things in a notebook after A Strange and Sublime Address, my first novel, at the end of which I'd made, and maybe I've described this in Why I Write Novels. I had made a list from, say, 1 to 25, I can't remember. And the list was, again, absurd. Tailor shop, this, something like that. And so there was absolutely nothing in the list that pointed towards any kind of a narrative. Yeah.
And that's really not the point of it at all.
Right. So there was that list, and some of the stuff on the list got in. I realized a lot of the stuff hasn't got in, and that kind of made me superstitious, and I stopped keeping lists. Stopped making lists, and thought that, okay, I can keep these outliers in my head. Now, by outlier is what as Janice has explained to you, but what I'll try to put in my own words is something that waits. It waits for what a kind of writer would, or a filmmaker, or whoever deals with narrative, would call a moment in a narrative that they're shaping at the moment, but the outlier has been there with them for a long time, maybe even for years. They're shaping the narrative. The outlier has been waiting to be put in somewhere, some space in which it can be put in. The narrative is just an excuse almost to put in that.
I love that you just flip this around.
To put that outlier in, but you cannot just put it in. You have to wait until such a narrative comes along that can accommodate the outlier, and then you feel a great sense of fulfillment and joy. The narrative by itself is not important to you. It's the kind of capacity it creates to bring those things in that have been waiting sometimes for years. And these things are very banal, seemingly inessential moments. I'll give you maybe 2 or 3 or four examples. I think Pyasa, the film, Sarjo Tera Chakrae, that whole astonishing phantasmagoric sort of sequence where in a kind of misty park, he's going around singing this song and then applying the trade. Apparently he saw, Gurudat, saw this happen and then he waited. He waited to put it in. So there is Pyasa, but what would it be without these outliers that were waiting to come in? Hitchcock is full of outliers. The idea of those, the using Mount Rushmore in, I think it was North by Northwest. It was waiting. He was waiting for a moment. Another one, even more interesting, in Vertigo, James Stewart and his friend go into an old second-hand bookshop, and they're trying to find out the history of this character who's connected to this woman they're following, and the man in the second-hand bookshop tells them about this Carlotta. I can't remember the name of the character, and it's becoming dark as they speak. So at some point he switches on the light. Completely unnecessary. There was, he could have done it at a point of time when there was no change in the light, whether it was evening or afternoon. But he's doing it at a certain time when the light is changing and the man needs to switch on the light. Everything then comes on with a different light. I think Hitchcock was waiting for, when should I put this in? When is the moment when those are outliers? And so Berlin for me, must have been, the dance hall. Many things were waiting. The eating of sausages.
Yes.
All of that was waiting to be put into a novel about a man arriving, etc., etc.
Also, well, let's just very, very quickly just meditate on the word sojourn itself. Of course, we know it means a temporary stay, a temporary visit, although all visits are temporary, really. All stays are impermanent.
Some of which it's a good thing.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. But I was just looking at the etymology of the word, and it's so interesting because it comes from these two Latinate words that mean under a day or lasting a little more than a day, which I thought was so beautiful.
Lovely.
Yes,
Yes.
so lovely.
Yeah.
And of course, we have many of these sojourns in your work. Apart from this
we
one.
kind of connect with journey in our heads, but it's also jour.
Yes. Just so lasting a little more than a day. I can see you're thinking about that.
So journey would also then maybe connected with that.
Yes. Isn't that beautiful?
That's interesting.
It just, of course, works so well as a title for this. But as I was saying, these sojourns, these temporary visits feature so much in a lot of your fiction. The temporariness of being a student somewhere, the temporariness of visiting a city 3 times, Bombay, in friend of my youth, and this, of course. So, of course, I'm interested in this space of the sojourn itself, and in particular, this one, because it's Berlin. It's a city that's grappling with its undivided self now, not its divided self anymore. And that was what was so interesting to me. That shift in focus and perspective. So would you, like to share what the sojourn means to you in terms of a literary sort of space, but also in more particularity with this novel, with Berlin, the city? Yeah?
Sure, great, thank you. I should also say that as we were walking towards the author's tent, I heard 2 people. One of them was poring over the program, and he said to the other, "Acha, ye sojourn kya hota hai?" And it's a good question. I don't know if he's here, but um, so thank you firstly for that really sort of interesting gloss. You know, uh, it's not a word that's used much anymore, but it's I didn't realize that. I think about it a lot because I think about sojourns a lot,
Yes.
and I don't think I would be sort of impeding myself from writing about future sojourns
Yeah.
if I were to say what I'm now more aware of after having begun writing a Strange and Sublime Address in 1986, is that almost all my books are about those journeys, short journeys. And a Strange and Sublime Address began with the idea of a boy going on holiday.
Yeah.
And there was really no more to it than that, and I didn't think that there needed to be more.
Yeah.
You know, so I just thought a holiday. So you know, Sojourn for me is also related to the idea of a holiday.
Holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a holiday is a space for me where somebody. So for me, a holiday is not necessarily going somewhere to look at historical monuments or whatever. Or going to a tourist destination. For me, it used to mean getting out of school and then going to my uncle's house in Calcutta,
Yes.
and a different sort of milieu from the one I was growing up in Bombay. So what happened was that the holiday became for me, these trips to Calcutta became to me a way of re-encountering the everyday. The everyday was something that in school in Bombay and coming back home, which was just a kind of escape, a delirious escape from school.
Yeah. I
you know,
love the use of that word.
yeah, was just a kind of time when I was deadened as far as the everyday was concerned. So one had to retreat into the fantasy worlds of various things. But when I went to Calcutta, I would be reunited with the everyday. That is everything that had been around me in Bombay. Bathrooms, showers, dinner time, and lunch, and everything else, which had no meaning for me in Bombay. I was just going through the motions. In Calcutta, would begin to gather meaning as kind of areas and sites and durations of meaning and even wonder and excitement.
So lovely.
So the holiday is
lovely.
was a place for me of re-encountering the everyday, which where it became unfamiliar.
Yeah.
So it's not that the boy on holiday is looking for monuments. In fact, he avoids monuments. He doesn't want to go with his parents to see the whatever it is, the Parthenon or the Taj Mahal.
Yeah.
But for him to kind of find everything around him exciting on a very mundane level is for me what the holiday is charged with. And then that becomes a source for me for the field that each one of my books almost explores.
Yes.
It's a charged and transformed field. It's made possible by a person going from one place to another. Plot does not interest me as such. It's that altered field, you know. So as far as this book is concerned, it's again, I mean, not that I thought of it in that way, but I found myself repeating that particular trope.
Yes.
And
But in a very particular place. I mean, this is
Berlin.
Berlin in 2005.
Yes.
It's very intentional, even though of course it doesn't
Yes.
appear so because
Yes.
it's seamlessly wrought in. But it is.
Because there is an argument
Fascinating.
going on to do with the new world that we now live in.
Yeah.
The
Exactly.
how Berlin relates to its unique relationship to this new world and to the one that has passed. But then each one of the books, although I've told you about the books in terms of this journey, each one of the books also contains an argument. The argument began with A Strange and Sublime Address. There were at least 3 related arguments in that book.
Yeah.
The first one was, and I remember making a jotting in my notebook at that time, saying that however multifariousness and unexpected the imagination might be, it cannot be as unexpected and multifarious as reality. That was one thing that I jotted down then.
Lovely.
So that was one argument.
Yeah.
The second argument had to do with the fact that I would not treat it as memory. I wanted it to be set in the present. Things are about to happen to the boy.
Yeah.
So it could have been written as a kind of fictionalized memoir of childhood.
Yes, a recounting.
A recounting.
But it really
Right, yes,
isn't.
yes.
Yeah.
That's so I
That's the
didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
That was the second argument. The third one was, so because one is growing up in a kind of atmosphere, in an also in an intellectual context.
Yeah.
The one I grew up in had to do with a misreading of, but a very dominant misreading of something called existentialism. You remember that word, right?
Yes, all too well.
Yeah. So existentialism, and another word that came with it was absurd. And so everything became a kind of metaphor for some sort of Western metaphysical idea of alienation. And one basically subscribing to that metaphysical idea meant that you missed everything in the works of Bergman or Beckett. You looked at it, you felt very satisfied. Especially you're 17 years old, and you felt satisfied. Oh God, this is absurd, or absurdist. This is existential. And you miss the humor and you miss the sensuousness. Later on, when I watched Bergman, I thought, my God, I saw this film before. How come I missed all the extraordinary detail, the luminosity? And that's because I'd been subscribing to that metaphysic. Now, A Strange and Sublime Address was when I realized I need to get out of there. And I need to stop being an existentialist and write about the street.
Oh, lovely. You know what? I enjoyed many things about this book, but I particularly enjoyed its sparseness. I'm just going to say that out loud in case you missed it. Sparseness. There is this sense of delicacy, I think is the word, but not quite. Again, see, I struggle. But truly there is an intentional withdrawing of too much detail. And, you've said how for you, construction is salvage because in terms of writing a novel, because so much of what you do, the writing, the editing is actually about taking away.
Right.
And your writing process is not what can I add, but what can I keep.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how do you cultivate this sparseness, Amit?
Yeah, so going back again to the essay which you mentioned, where I said that my novels are not made of the sentences I write, but the sentences I keep.
You keep.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it's an act of salvage.
Yes.
And the way that works is because I write a paragraph. I write paragraph by paragraph, and I write a paragraph or 2 paragraphs. I think, okay, I've done my work. I go back to it the next day. I find the paragraphs are unreadable. I suppose this is not a new experience for writers, but I find them, that they're terrible. No. So then the first feeling is despair, a sinking feeling. Then I find, and this happened from Strange and Sublime Address onwards.
Right.
And I find that, okay, I have to take this out. I have to take that out. Then I take it out on the basis of this bit is dead, but that bit is alive. And the bit that's alive, Janice, is not necessarily a beautiful image.
No.
It's just something that works and has a life to it.
Yeah.
I think what one is fighting for in writing is a kind of aliveness, in writing or anything to do with the arts,
Yes.
So there is no other fight.
Yeah.
and what this definition of aliveness is kind of shifting. There's no and whether it pertains to a living writer or dead writer is not certain.
No.
Which is why the arguments about canon are only useful up to a point, because sometimes the dead are more alive than the living.
So true.
So one is fighting over there to salvage the alive bits.
The aliveness.
And that's, I suppose, results in what remains, whether what remains is long sentences, images, or something other than that.
But sentences also, and this sort of leads me to my next question, sentences also that do what you do so well, which is collapse an act and an experience.
Collapse what?
Collapse an act and an experience.
Right.
Right? And I think this is where what I was saying at the beginning, sort of comes into play, this feeling of compression and expansion that your novels bring about in a reader. This sense that a book is time-filled, but also timeless in some way. And we know about your preoccupations with time. They are, intense and major, and they sort of work at the level of the novel, which, we've just touched on so briefly about how you don't wish it to be a recounting of something that's past. You want that pastness to be there, in fact, and not even sort of visible to the reader.
Right.
And it works also at the level of the sentence. Exactly what I was saying about collapsing the act and the experience, sometimes by removing commas. I loved, what you said about that, the absence of punctuation, collapsing sentences in a way that, disorient the reader sometimes a little bit. But there is also the presence of time in this novel in so many ways. It jumps, it stops, it starts, it collapses. There's also, historical time, of course, Berlin, 2005, but constantly harking back to, its divided past and its present undividedness. And there's also, the moment in time that this narrator, this unnamed narrator, occupies. But I'm fascinated by how time moves in this novel, or at some points even just lies still. How do you do that, Amit? What is it with your relationship with time and the written word, and this particular moment that you're capturing? I'm going to call this novel a moment, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Could you
we
share
need to
with
look
us?
for new names. No, seriously, Virginia Woolf is right. No, I'm not comparing, but I'm just saying, talking about the struggle of writers.
Yeah.
That she's writing to a lighthouse, and she's
Yes.
writing to a friend. It's not a novel. I need to find another word for it.
Yeah.
She settles for elegy, but that doesn't quite do it either.
No.
Yeah. Anyway, but you was asking me about this thing about time.
Yes, how do you work with time within this novel? Because it's almost sometimes like an old film. It jumps and starts and cuts, and moments are collapsed and then expanded. And I was just wondering how you do that at the level of craft, of course, which maybe we may not have time for, sadly. But why is the treatment of time in this particular way in this novel?
I mean, for me, the present moment, as I said earlier, is the important moment. The present moment is where it's happening. It's about to happen.
Yes.
Any sort of sense of it having happened and being available and then recounted, to me is, I steer away from that because I can't deal with it. It doesn't do anything for me. So in a sense, one is going against the métier of the novel. as a narrative form, but others have done that.
Yeah.
But so to do that now, I mean, I wonder how I would have responded to a question in 1991. But even in 1991, I knew that, for instance, revising A Strange and Sublime Address was a nightmare. And you know, and you're talking about film. At that time, I suddenly realized, and I was very interested at one point in becoming a filmmaker, in case.
So interesting.
Yeah. In case things didn't work out. So anyway.
It's good to have a backup.
Yeah, I thought it's a good backup. Anyway, but during Strange and Sublime Address, which at one point I thought, there's nothing I can salvage here. To go back to that word, there's nothing I can salvage here. There's one chapter that had come out in the London Review of Books. That looked fine.
Right.
And that was the chapter in which what did they say? Find your voice. You know, I found what it is I wanted to do. I suddenly in Oxford I realized it was like the actual voice, singer's voice, getting a particular kind of resonance. You know, so I realized as I was describing Chota Mama having a shower, that something had happened. You know, and then I would have to sort of revise what I'd already written in light of that.
Yeah.
So, and when I went to do that, I found I could keep nothing. This is what it seemed to me at a certain point. Then I began to salvage and rewrite and salvage. And then I began to shift paragraphs as well and add paragraphs in positions that seemed correct to me. And you know, a young American student of mine, my first creative writing student, when I was creative arts fellow at Oxford, it had no teaching responsibilities, but he came to me and said, "You're creative arts fellow, would you mind sort of looking at my work?" I said, "Okay, fine." So I began I kept this matter hidden as creative arts fellow, but he found out, and he began to read me, and then he said, "You know, Amit, you place one paragraph after another and it seems fine, but actually you could have placed it the other way around as well, right?" So I said, "Yes, that's true. That's true. You're quite right. It is an illusion." And then it spoke to me because when I was working on it, I had also thought of the film editor and how they create the illusion of sequence. So that was one of the things I was doing in order to well, I created an illusion of sequence, but I wanted each paragraph also to be a standalone paragraph. And the standalone paragraph, and the standalone paragraph is a standalone paragraph because it exists within the narrative, that is what happened yesterday and what's happening tomorrow, but it also exists in the now, in the moment. And I think this is true of any work which I find compelling. And now I look at commas, I don't go out looking for them, but I realize what I'm doing is I'm dealing with punctuation, I'm dealing with sentence construction. They saw the Brandenburg Gate change to the Brandenburg Gate came up, which whatever it does, it gives the Brandenburg Gate a particular presence, it gives it its own a movement. So otherwise it's just there, and they saw the Brandenburg. The Brandenburg Gate came up.
It's cinematic.
Yeah. So I was making those changes. Now when I make those changes, then of course a copy editor will come along, and they will say that, "Do you want to do this, or do you want to smooth it?" Or I said, "No, I don't want to do that.
Leave it.
Just leave it."
Okay, my last question before we open this up to the audience, and it's a very quick one. Our unnamed narrator seems deeply uncomfortable with the cold. And as the winter progresses, we see that he buys a thicker jacket, and then a thicker jacket, and then a cap, and then snowshoes, and it's sort of very sweet and very adorable. And I'm just also fascinated by this this immense space that he gives to the weather and how cold it's getting. And I was just wondering if that also parallels the kind of sense of him losing himself in the city, whether that was deliberate, the weather and him kind of deepening into something wintry and and lost.
Right. Those weather moments were again outliers. They're waiting for a moment to come in.
Interesting.
You know, the
Now
big,
you're answering my question. Yes.
the big shoes. But because I found the Berlin cold myself quite nice. You know, it was extremely cold.
Yeah.
I felt like a frozen thing sometimes. The parts of me that were exposed.
Yes. There's a line where he touched his face and it felt like it.
Yeah, it was like something
something
else.
other than himself.
Yes. So, but I mean, now I'm just going into idle gossip. I myself am protective about the cold
Best
because
part.
of the because I
Yes.
sing, etc.
Yes. So it's that there is that preoccupation. But
Maybe there is that. Yeah.
yes,
yeah.
I have so many more questions,
Yeah.
which of course I will bug you with later.
Sure.
But let's just open it up quickly to the audience. Yes, this gentleman up front, and anyone else? This gentleman there. Any ladies with questions? Yes. Please.
Hi, good morning. Brilliant session. Before I ask Amit your question, I have to say, Janice, you've been phenomenal. I've watched you over 5 days. You made me fall in love with fungus on day one, and I don't know where to start. Amit, to you, I'm from Calcutta. I studied there, and I studied in Berlin. And I've read pretty much all you've written. Something very interesting I find in your writing, in that sparse style that you have, is the way you have the aesthetics of a city come up, right? Architecture, artifacts. I remember in 2 years in Calcutta, the old doors being auctioned off. And in Berlin, that white slab toilet, which occupies much of the early days of your protagonist. So my question is, how much do these artifacts inspire your story, your writing, the way the story goes forward? Is it just backdrop, or is there more to it?
No, it's not backdrop. It's another part of that argument against, you know, the idea that the novel is about a protagonist or is about character. They're all sort of part of a kind of shifting world of meaning. They're all on par with each other. The objects, the artifacts, the man or woman at the center, so, but in a realist novel, they would be there in order to illustrate the life or fill in, information about the life of the protagonist. Here, they have a life independent of the protagonist. Yeah.
Sorry, there were hands over here as well. Yes, and the gentleman there. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Good morning, sir.
Morning.
So I'm in my young 20s, and obviously you may be in your 40s. So while you were in
I'm in my young 60s. I'm 60 years old. Actually.
Okay. So like in 20s, you feel that okay, there are some things to write, and there are some things. Okay, you also travel a lot. So, and there is this thing in the mind that okay, I'm not able to write so many things. There are so many things which I want to do later in life. So even me, I'm experiencing this kind of existential
Already?
difficulties. Yeah. So like, what do you suggest to me for that sake? Yeah.
Well,
I've sort of been doing things which I didn't expect to do all my life. I mean, whether it was at 16 I turned towards Hindustani classical music and became a Hindustani classical singer, and there are various other projects connected with that. 2005 I began this project called This Is Not Fusion. I also did maybe ill-advised art exhibition. I don't think ill-advised, but who knows? Whatever. So I've been doing things as they come to me. They're all equally implausible as projects, but I pursue them.
just very quickly, there's a gentleman with a question there, and there was a lady somewhere. Yes. Okay. We get to you in just a moment.
Thank you. I don't know if you remember, Amit, but we met in, I think it was Chemnitz at a conference. That was the time when you were introducing Calcutta as a book. And
Right.
I wondered if you would agree that you were both talking about sparseness and about time. And I remember the feeling, I was trying to think, how can I characterize Calcutta? And the image that came to my mind was of that science fiction program on British television, Doctor Who. That your novels are like the TARDIS, that they appear on the outside to be very small and simple and sparse. But as soon as you get into them, they become huge because they have all these things that, as you say, come alive. Would you say that that is the aim of your technique?
So, thank you. I haven't watched Doctor Who. I mean, so I don't know the analogy, the metaphor. But oh, I see the red
It's a telephone box, I
that
think.
red phone booth.
Yes,
Is it?
and
Yeah.
you enter it and it's a whole universe.
Okay,
inside.
okay, I get you. I've watched it before moving on to another
like
channel.
Doctor Who.
So I've seen that. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, people. It sounds kind of weird to say that. Or it sounds like name dropping to say people have been saying this. The first person, again, this will sound like terrible name dropping, but the first person to say this was this guy James Wood, the critic. So he said it to me personally after having read a short story called Portrait of the Artist. It was set in Calcutta. It had come out in the London Review of Books. He said it's quite short, but one doesn't get a sense of that. It seems much, the time seems to move in a different way. And some other novelist also called Deborah Levy, I think, epic writer. She said something like that, which I had been arguing. I'd been arguing against the epic. She said, a friend of my youth. So maybe it's not something I'm aware of, but certainly, I mean, I love the short form. I don't necessarily identify it with the kind of brevity of narrative. I love it as a form. When I wrote A Strange and Sublime Address and it turned out to be short, which was a problem for publishers, I did begin to research the marketability of the short form in Anglophone cultures, especially in England. And I would go to bookshops at that time when it was waiting for a publisher and search for short novels on the bookshelves. And the only people who seemed to write short novels were women, Muriel Spark and Jean Rhys, both writers I admire a great deal. But I don't associate, let's say, what is it called, Good Morning Midnight, or Voyage into the Dark. I am hoping I'm getting the titles of the Jean Rhys novels right, with brief periods of time. I think they occupy a lot, but they are very short. Sojourn is my shortest novel by far, and it's very short. It causes me a little bit of anxiety even now in terms of what will the publishers say, but yeah. I love the form. I love that short form, and I think it is well loved in languages across the world, in modern languages and literatures across the world, other than English.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. We're going to have to stop the questions there. I'm getting very, very stern sidelong glances. But please do feel free to meet with Amit at the author signing booth and get copies of this this beautiful book. I mean, look at it. It's really just gorgeous. It really is. Have a lovely day.
Thank you, Janice.
And thank you so much.